guys, MrRoflWaffles here. This is a list of massive tips that I learned while playing and beating SAROS, and this video is sponsored by PlayStation. You're gonna want to know these from the beginning of your playthrough. I wish I knew these sooner. They would have saved me time, I would have died less, I'd have gotten better upgrades, and I would have been able to kill this boss really easily, which normally is a menace at the start of the game. So, let's get started. First, the game doesn't tell you this until you're an hour or two in, but this is the fastest way to move through the space. So rather than just spamming dash over and over again, you're going to want to dash, but then hold it down, and you'll then break into a super sprint, which allows you to navigate much faster when you're outside combat. Next, this took me genuinely about 25 hours to learn, and I'm so mad that it did because it was so painful. I was starting to play the game, and I'd find a new huge artifact upgrade, but then my artifact inventory would be full, so I wouldn't be able to pick it up. And I thought that this was just part of the game because artifacts would be bound to your character until you reset or you died. But I was wrong. How it actually works is the item that is used for redrawing loot, called Acolyte's Wager, can be used to get rid of artifacts as well. So in your inventory, hover over the artifact you want to swap out and discard it with square, and you'll only see that option if you have a redraw available. Next, you'd have no idea of this at the beginning of the game unless you listened to a YouTuber like me telling you it. The skill tree becomes less and less reliant on Luminite for upgrades and much more reliant on Halcyon as you get further and further through the progression. So right now, I have 1 Halcyon and 328k Luminite just sitting there because I can only progress the tree further using the Halcyon. And some of the later upgrades cost upwards of 10 Halcyon to unlock. So you can see what I'm getting at here. Anytime you see Halcyon during a cycle, it's a great idea to try and grab it. And honestly, I'd take it over any other item it might be offered against. This will put you in a much better place when you start getting to the mid and end game. And also, you might be wondering, where can I find Halcyon more reliably? And I think there are two kind of key answers for that you want to look out for. One is, yeah, okay, you can get it as a random drop, but slightly more frequently in red containers as one of the 50-50 options. But also, it's often found at the end of a Nightmare Strand, typically for your first completion, which always has this icon on the minimap. Be aware though that you can only enter these while the eclipse is active. Next, you might have been playing, found a new weapon, and not really known if it's actually better than what you're already using. Especially in the early game, I find that this happens a bit more frequently. And this can be a problem because you've got a limited number of keys that are used for unlocking bonus room doors or these yellow containers for power weapons. So choosing when to use them is really important. And to do that, you need to be able to understand whether an item is an upgrade or not. So let me break down how you can make the best possible decisions in this area. So all weapons come with perks, and main weapons also have an alt fire, which is really worth paying attention to. And the nice thing about these is you can pretty much understand the alt fire on a weapon the second you pick it up. You just need to shoot it a couple times and you'll be like, oh, okay, my shotgun is normally close range, but with the alt fire, it becomes a grenade launcher, or it's going to fire pellets that have no drop off or something like that. So that's quite nice for making a very quick snap decision about a gun, but there's obviously a lot more to the process of evaluating them as well, such as the perks. So let's say you're using a power weapon, right? And you really like it, it's getting the job done. Maybe it's got a perk on it like vacuum bomb on your prominence, and you really like how specifically that works. But then you look at it and you say, oh, okay, it's only level 5, and you're starting to level up quite a bit, so is it time to upgrade that power weapon? In this instance, I'd say, because Vacuum Bomb maybe really suits your playstyle, like we mentioned, you might specifically only want to do that upgrade and do that swap when you find something that still has Vacuum Bomb, but also then has another perk that synergizes well with it. So how do you do that? Well, every 10 levels, starting at level 5, power weapons will have an extra perk. So at level 15, they have 2 perks. At level 25, they have 3 perks. At 35, 4 perks, and at 45, 5 perks. And this means that if you have found something that you're super attached to, and you just want the best possible version of that, it's going to be a little bit gated behind you reaching those level thresholds. And that means, if we go back to what I was saying about keys earlier, if you're thinking of spending your keys on some of those options like opening chests or opening rooms, you might want to hold off on doing that until you hit one of those level thresholds and then start spending, because then you'll be able to get stuff with more perks when you actually open things up. So that's alt fire and perks, but the sort of final distinguishing factor I'd say between the weapons is the base weapon itself, right? How the thing functions. And generally, for distinguishing between what's good and what's bad, you got to start with the fact that there are two main types of weapons. There are auto-hit weapons, and there are non-auto-hit weapons called rewire weapons. Auto-hit weapons guide your bullets towards the target when you're aiming in generally the right direction, but they won't hit every single shot against that target. Instead, they hit more reliably when these dots on the crosshair have a tighter spread, or basically when you're closer to the target, but you can still miss. So these are nice because you can be bad, essentially, and have poor aim and still hit a good number of shots, or you can use your gun skill and hit even more shots if you do aim better while you're using this weapon. Now, the other type of main weapons is rewire, like I said. Those disable auto hits in favor of extra damage for even more precise aiming. So weapons with rewire have this icon on the weapon inspect, so they're very easily distinguishable from their counterpart. And I don't have a huge preference for specific weapon selection early on as a recommendation, but you can never go wrong with the smart rifle or ricochet pistol. So when you first start playing the game, I'd honestly just see what you like, try using a bunch of different weapons and really getting a feel for what the different options are in the sandbox. But there are scenarios where you'll find that there is just a gun that fits a situation really well. So to go back to the ricochet pistol, when you get to that first boss about an hour or two into the game, there are going to be these little things that you need to shoot, and they're a little bit fiddly to target, right? But if you're using the ricochet pistol, you can shoot one, and then it's going to ricochet and shoot others for you, saving you a load of hassle. And that could be really annoying, but the ricochet pistol does the work for you. So find weapons that suit your familiarity with these sorts of games, your ability to actually aim well, and that fit the situation well, and then also consider the perks and the alt fire and use that to make a nice holistic decision about whether or not something is really an upgrade. Also, one thing to note is in the example I gave before, I was talking about power weapons, getting 2 perks at level 15 and then 3 perks at 25, etc. For main weapons, it's slightly different. That happens at level 10. So 10, 2 perks, 20, 3 perks, etc. My next weapons tip for you is power weapon specific. If you're using something that's, let's say, level 15, and you really like it, but then you find something out in the world that's like level 35, and you're like, this thing looks so good, what I'd recommend you do is pick up that new amazing weapon, and then re-roll the old weapon that you previously were enjoying using that is now on the ground. And the reason for this is you could just re-roll the shiny new weapon that you found, but it already has a good roll, so why would you re-roll it, right? That doesn't make any sense. You're now leaving behind a weapon that you really liked previously. You might as well just gamble a little bit and see if you can make that weapon better by re-rolling it just before you part ways with it. And worst case scenario, it doesn't roll into something that you like, and so you still have the shiny new weapon that you just found. And the good thing about doing it this way, where you pick up the new weapon first and then you re-roll your old one on the ground, is that it will raise it up to your level when you do this. So it won't be level 10 anymore, it'll jump all the way up, and that'll mean that whatever you roll it into has more of a chance of being good for your current kit. Next, for both main and power weapons, every weapon will drop with its own stats. To work this through as an example so you can see where I'm going with this, each stat has a maximum value limited by the weapon's proficiency level when looted. The current value of each stat is determined by one of the 3 main attributes on your character, either resilience, the green icon, command, the blue icon, or drive, the kind of yellowy icon. So, since I've got 160 plus of each attribute here, the stats are nearly maxed out for these lower level weapons. Additionally, you can get some weapons which, when they drop, will have these orange arrows on them, and those weapons will have stats that are boosted even further than you would expect without those orange arrows. So definitely look out for those, that's always a good sign. Next, let's talk perfect reload. The perfect reload minigame instantly reloads your weapon, but it can be tricky to get right. The problem is that perfect reloads use trigger input, so if you're spamming your weapon without thinking, you'll find it harder to hit a perfect reload because you'll just hit the button too early. But luckily, there is a setting to change this behavior from the right trigger to a dedicated reload button, which defaults to being R3 or pushing in your right stick. To find this in gameplay settings, you'll find perfect reload by fire button and turn that off. Now your perfect reload is only activated with the reload button. Next, sometimes a specific boss or new area will give you a ton of trouble, and that's really just because you're going into these places underpowered. Obviously, upgrading the armor matrix will increase your base power, but you can become super powerful every new cycle without needing those upgrades. So, instead of teleporting directly to the biome of your next objective, which usually entails clearing an area and killing the boss, you can actually travel to an earlier biome to give yourself more time to gear up before facing the boss that is giving you trouble. And also, as you play the game, you'll begin unlocking permanent gear like access to jump pads and grapples when you do this as well. And these will grant access to secret zones that were previously inaccessible in earlier zones, so it's definitely worth going back. Next, I know some of you absolute gaming units like turning sounds and vibrations and a whole bunch of things off before you start a new game, but in my opinion, in controller settings, keep vibration on. The controller is going to vibrate when close to containers or secret shootable plates that open secret doors, and it is really worthwhile having that feedback. Also, put your trigger strength to max. This helps me distinguish between my power weapon and alt fire much easier, as one will activate with a half trigger pull and the other with a full trigger pull. One gameplay setting is fall protection also, and this is something you should definitely turn on, and this will mean that the game will help you mitigate deadly falls when you have it activated. Of course, falling is just one of many sources of damage in this game, but luckily I have several tips for alleviating random damage as well. Number 1. The toxic pool in this area deals damage when touching it. If you repeatedly jump while standing inside these toxic pools, you'll take 0 damage. Also, if you do take damage, melee or shoot these green blobs and you'll get free heals. On top of that, if your body looks blue, it means you're invulnerable for 1 hit, including damage taken from falling off the map. And finally, I really recommend you do not fall back in fights, because often you'll just lead a bunch of enemies to a corner and then you'll be cornered and you'll die. I promise it's easier to try to fight inside the arena where the enemies spawned and use that as the kind of battleground, and you'll be cornered less frequently. Next, there's a way to have unlimited power weapon usage at nearly any level. So, the damage type called Corruption only appears under the Eclipse and lowers your max HP the more it builds. But, crucially, it will never consume your entire HP bar, which is useful for what we're about to do. And using your power weapon slightly removes some of the corruption as well. So, we can use these mechanics to our advantage. Inside the armor matrix, one of the first purple Halcyon upgrades is Shield Amplifier, which lets you trap and draw power from corrupted projectiles. And this means when you're out in the field with that upgrade activated, you can suck these corrupted yellow balls and immediately use your power weapon, and that will essentially give you unlimited power weapon uses so long as you don't then mind being at low HP. Next, I just talked about a way that you can shoot your power weapon a lot and reduce your corruption, but what if you actually might want your corruption level to be higher? Okay, sometimes corruption actually increases your damage, so you might benefit from it accumulating. So, while under the Eclipse, loot you find will likely be corrupted, and while corrupted artifacts are very easy to understand, they always just have a negative modifier, corrupted weapons are maybe a little less obvious as to what exactly is going on there. The way they work is they deal more damage while you are corrupted, and even more damage if you're heavily corrupted. Next, I just mentioned artifacts that you might find under the Eclipse which are corrupted, and these give you negative effects such as Hard Fall, which enables full damage, and another which adds a cooldown timer to dash. I almost always avoid these negative modifiers personally, because I just find them kind of annoying compared to the other options in the game, but the negative effects are not permanent. So once you defeat an Overlord, aka one of the big bosses, the corruption effects will disappear on those artifacts, meaning you can continue playing into the next zone with increased power and less things holding you back. But that is not the only way to remove corruption from artifacts. Eventually, you'll unlock Carcosan modifiers inside of Primary's menus. In there, you can utilize the modifiers page every cycle and modify it depending on your goal for your next run. And these will come in either Protection or Trial, which makes the game easier and harder, respectively. But one of the protection modifiers is Artifact Immunity, which negates corruption effects on artifacts completely. Now, remember, you'll need to equip a Trial to balance the difficulty, so a few recommendations here. If you're strictly going for a boss, or you're struggling in a certain area, use Halcyon removal for +6. But like I said before, this resource is pretty rare, so leave this off if you're trying to farm Halcyon. You can get another +2 on the dial pretty easily from Artifact Destruction, which destroys a random artifact when entering a new biome. And I don't think this happens often enough to be really problematic, and you'll find higher level artifacts the deeper you go anyway, so I don't think it's too bad. And at endgame, you're no longer going to need Lucenite to upgrade the armor matrix, so I like to use Lucenite devaluation at level 2 for an easy +5. Now for a quick bonus, what if you don't want any of these pesky trial modifiers and you only want protection buffs? Maybe the game's kicking your ass a little bit. Well, there's a way to disable the negative trials, and that's by going to gameplay settings and setting unlimited protection modifiers to on. But just keep in mind, this will make the game really easy, or at least comparatively much easier. So if you don't want to kind of take away a lot of the combat difficulty, then I would maybe suggest avoiding this setting. Next, this is a really simple one. When you're starting a cycle, you are gonna have, for example, 3 perks on your weapons if you're starting at level 25. But if you don't like those perks, you could just start another cycle and get a new random roll of 3 perks. Like, you don't have to use the ones that you get that first time. And this is a really big deal because perks can be massively impactful. Like, I've skipped weapons that were in the level 70s because I had lower level weapons where the perks were just so good that the upgrade didn't make sense. And the fact that you can just re-roll your perks essentially when you spawn in here at the start of a cycle means that you can kind of set yourself up for success if you're smart about it. Next, let's talk more about perks. Which perks might you want to really look out for? Well, my favorite combination, on your main weapon, look for Power Generator. I immediately pick these up when I see them, no matter what weapon type it is. And then I look for a Prominence with Vacuum Bomb, because Vacuum Bomb sucks up projectiles, which is really nice for defense. Then, all I do is spam my main weapon to generate power for my power weapon, and then I spam my power weapon as often as I can. And I specifically choose Prominence as the power weapon because it's got by far the quickest activation out of all of the power weapons, which makes it super easy to use during fast-paced combat. Okay, so with all of these tips, let's say you've gotten out of the first hour or 2 of the game and you're starting to get several hours in. What do the tips start to look like then? Well, I've got some weapon recommendations that I think you're really going to want to look out for. So, first of all, when you get a crossbow, oh boy, that thing is good as hell. I love the crossbows in this game. You won't find them until a little later in, but they are very strong. For example, the Repeater Crossbow's ult fire shoots a single bolt that splits into homing projectiles that seek out targets, which can be so useful when you're cornered or you're low health against a bunch of enemies. You can just sit back and shoot this thing at the ground and it'll kill the entire area. It's phenomenal. But outside that, if you're doing more of a melee build, use shotguns every time. These are going to rapidly increase an enemy's stagger bar, and when an enemy is staggered, they can't attack. So take that opportunity to then melee them to death in that state, and that will then deal even more damage to them and surrounding enemies. And that's not even the best part of the melee combat, by the way. Eventually, you'll unlock the ability to press R1 to immediately jump to staggered enemies and deal even more damage. So as the game goes on, those early melee builds that you might be exploring are only going to get better once you get this upgrade. Next, that's not all the stagger tech I've got for you, because staggering can actually insta-kill enemies on its own. Some enemies in the game can fly, and sometimes they'll hover around in an out-of-bounds area, and if you build up that stagger meter on them and then they become staggered, they will fall off the map and instantly die, which can be quite nice tech. Next, rather than spoiling endgame bosses and those sorts of things, I'll save that for other videos where I give you guys specific guides. And if you're interested in those videos, you should totally subscribe to me right now so you don't miss them. But one thing that everyone is going to see in the tutorial is this boss, right? It's the start of the game, but this thing is hard as hell, and some of you might even think that it's impossible to take down in the tutorial. But I've actually killed it, and I discovered that it had some secret rewards waiting for me as well. So to do this, to emulate me taking it down and to do it yourselves, first of all, you need to shoot the boss as much as possible early in the fight before it starts wiping the entire arena with projectiles. This is probably where you're going to die the first time round, but persevere. Once this happens, run immediately to the platform where the boss spawned, and there you'll see some stairs. Then, the fire rings on the ground will not hit you as long as you're running on the middle of the stairs, just like this. You can then hide behind the statues pretty often to avoid incoming damage from yellow tracking beams as well, and also avoid the yellow or red projectiles. If you do this loop a few times, the boss will die, and you'll get a bonus Halcyon for your troubles. And if you haven't picked the game up yet, SAROS is available April 30th on PS5, and thank you PlayStation once again for sponsoring this video.